Now, my grandmother was a wonderful person. She taught me how to play the game Monopoly. She understood that the name of the game is to acquire. She would accumulate everything she could, and eventually she became the master of the board. And eventually, every time, she would take my last dollar, and I would quit in utter defeat. And then she would always say the same thing to me. She'd look at me and she'd say, "One day, you'll learn to play the game." One summer, I played Monopoly with a neighbor almost every day, all day long. We'd play Monopoly for hours. And that summer, I learned to play the game. I came to understand the only way to win is to make a total commitment to acquisition. I came to understand that money and possessions, that's the way that you keep score. And by the end of that summer, I was more ruthless than my grandmother. I was ready to bend the rules if I had to win that game. And I sat down with her to play that fall. I took everything she had. I destroyed her financially and psychologically. I watched her give her last dollar and quit in utter defeat. And then she had one more thing to teach me. Then she said, "Now it all goes back in the box." All those houses and hotels, all the railroads and utility companies, all that property and all that wonderful money, now it all goes back in the box. I didn't want it to go back in the box. No, she said, none of it was really yours. You got all heated up about it for a while. But it was around a long time before you sat down at the board. And it will be here after you're gone. Players come and players go. But it all goes back in the box. Houses and cars, titles and clothes, filled barns, bulging portfolios, even your body. Because the fact is that everything I clutch and consume and hoard is going to go back in the box, and I'm going to lose it all. That's not much of an ROI on that. You have to ask yourself, when you finally get the ultimate promotion, when you've made the ultimate purchase, when you buy the ultimate home, when you have stored up financial security and climbed the ladder of success to the highest rung you can possibly climb it, and the thrill wears off, and it will wear off, then what? How far do you have to walk down that road before you see where it leads? Surely you understand, it'll never be enough. So you have to ask yourself the question, what matters?
That was an excerpt by a man named Pastor John Ortberg, and he's become rather famous recently with this particular analogy he uses called back in the box. I first learned about it because of some psychology texts I was reading, and they were using this to treat severe type A personalities, those that have compulsions to constantly want more and more. And I found it to be quite brilliant, and I wanted to express that excerpt because it really puts into perception the sickness of the culture that's been generated. I would extend to that the notion of competition as well. For if you ever compete for, say, number one, how exactly can that possibly work, and how can you maintain that? Throughout time, anybody that's ever been good at anything has always been outdone eventually. So there really is no such thing as a winner. It's impossible. In my background as a musician, I would enter musical competitions, and everyone would compete, and it was actually quite ridiculous and vain, and they would eventually someone would be put on a pedestal as the best of their instrument or what have you. And it's just a matter of time before someone more proficient can come along and outdo them. And I think history has shown that repeatedly. So there's the focus is incorrect. And I think his relationship that he denotes there is actually quite profound. So I thought that was a good introduction. I hope everybody can appreciate that. He's a great egalitarian Christian, and as opposed to the fire and brimstone, fear-mongering forms of Christian pontification, he does a wonderful job on the other side of that. And of course, you don't even have to relay any form of religion to it at all. It's just pure psychology. There's a twisted reverse analysis happening where everybody is obsessed with more and more in this culture, and what you tend to find is it's absolutely artificial. And it is, of course, also very, very destructive. And some of the most sad emails that I get are the ones that assume that abundance has something to do with everyone having access to everything that's possible, and hence a rejection of the notions of a resource-based economy, because the argument is that we have to have this stratification in order to have some form of incentive of where to go. But there's nowhere to go. It goes to infinity. So there's something, the truth lies somewhere in between. This is the July 29th, Wednesday, bi-weekly radio address. I just got back from London recently. I'm a little sluggish, so please bear with me. It's a gray day here in Brooklyn. I have this fog. So if I start rambling or if I sound a little dry, I apologize. I'm going to try and snap out of the jet lag funk. But first I want to thank everybody in London that came there. There was some wonderful people that came from many different distances, long distances, and I really appreciated that. And I apologize to those that might have come from long distances and I didn't have a chance to talk to you very long. As you might imagine, it's difficult in those environments, and as most of you saw, to engage in lengthy conversations, because everyone sort of wants to talk at once. But regardless, I really appreciated that, and anyone that gave me information, believe me, I will review the information that you've given me, and I will respond accordingly. And also, I really want to thank everybody that helped in that event as well. It really went well, and I was happy, even though I was very tired during the presentation. I really felt good, and I thought the communication was good. And the recorded version, high-quality recorded version, is being put together now, so we can get rid of that Ustream version, which those things are always a little unstable. But nevertheless, we'll have that up there. And apart from other project news, project team news actually is what I want to talk about. I have given a lot of thought, and I've mentioned this numerous times in radio broadcasts, and I've had to really step back to figure out what the best focus of project teams really are and how to navigate and orchestrate these issues. And what I've come to understand is there's too many right now, and we need to focus on the central team. So I'm breaking down the teams as of now, and this is going to be updated on the website, and we're going to revise the communities, and we're going to revise the forum and revise all the lists as well. And it's going to be a bit of a shift, but everyone will be notified that it's signed into any of these teams, and you'll have instructions on how to rejoin, basically. The main teams are simply going to be the communications team and the creative team. That's it. The communications team will have the same sub-teams: education, activism, lecture. And the creative team will take on a different light, which will simply deal with design, science, and technology in a different frame of reference. I'm going to build a component or a new site that's going to pose the question to all of you: what if we could start from scratch on the planet Earth? What if we could take all 6.5 billion people, throw them into some type of vessel, send them off to a hotel planet somewhere, and let them hang out for a little while all the greatest scientific minds come back to Earth, and we break down everything, and we start from scratch based on the information we know today, and reconstruct society from the ground up. Obviously, it's a fantasy, but it puts in perspective a brilliant train of thought of how to approach things from efficiency and the perception of efficiency and sustainability and maximum efficiency, and how to incorporate all of those attributes along the planet, where the energy is, how to set up infrastructure based on where we know things are, how to assess virtually every form of resource and orchestrate it into a manner that makes it into what we all know as a resource-based economy at the highest level of efficiency. So there's going to be a new section added that is going to pose this, and we're probably going to use Google Earth for this because there's programming layers you can do to add custom layers. I hope I'm being clear on this. The goal, the assignment to the entire creative team, those of you that can think think technologically and scientifically, or maybe just have great ideas, even if you don't know the background of the possibility, is to do a complete planetary redesign based on absolute efficiency. I'm going to leave it at that. And that is going to be, I think, a really unique project if we can get that going, something to show the world what's possible. I'd love to see people come in that actually do have lots of experience in engineering to basically have different postulations, how to maximize the Gulf Stream potential, how to take New York City and completely revise it into the most efficient structure imaginable, how to create tunnels and maglev trains and resource hubs and the most efficient placement of transportation hubs for the entire North American region. A total planetary redesign coming from a creative perspective. So I think that's a great idea. Other than that, all the other teams, administrative team, moderator teams, those are not really teams. Those are people that are certainly helping, but they don't need the team requirements, at least on the surface of what we're trying to approach. We need the communications team and the creative team. Creative team can deal with anything from even how to redesign an automobile. Granted, if you are inclined in engineering, you don't want to give away something that someone's going to steal and patent. So I don't recommend putting out literally schematics if you happen to have them. But you put the notion in, and you support it by singular logic. If you can support it by logic, then it can be done. It's just a matter of getting the technicals there. So I hope that helps to clarify that. That's going to go in the works after I finally figure out what I'm doing with all of my other backed up things in regard to the site. But that is the new revision, and I hope that works out well. I think it very much will. And by the way, there will be issues that are going to be more specific. I am going to talk more about internet censorship, and the activism team is going to have issues for that. I am going to talk more about Codex Alimentarius and anything that affects the environment as a whole and the culture as a whole. We have to begin getting active on multiple levels, and the communications team is the most critical for that. So that's going to be happening relatively soon. And that's about it. Jacque and Roxanne are going to join us in the next hour, and they're going to talk about lifestyle and some certain technological aspects as well, which goes into my prior point. I know most of the things that Jacque and I and Roxanne have talked about have related to the general nature of the society and specific issues such as language and basic humanities and scientific points. Now I would like to have him address some technical issues that I know keep coming up. And I have some questions for you as well, which I'm about to go through, and they will be relayed to Jacque as well, because there were a few of them that were in that context. So we're at about quarter after. I'm going to go into your questions for the first hour right now. Number one, your movies warn of the possibility of a one-world government. However, some degree of global unity is necessary for the Venus Project to succeed. How will we distinguish between steps by a corrupt few who want power and others who are genuinely striving for global unification? Well, that's an interesting question. I think you just have to examine what the end goal might be and the means to that end, so to speak. What separates our ideas of global unification from, say, global governance is that word governance. Government is as it exists, is an institution that deals with people making virtually solely economic decisions about the welfare of society. In the new society, it's not a matter of budgets and money. It's a matter of understanding resources, and this is entirely transparent. So when it comes to global unification from a knowledge standpoint and a systems approach to society, government isn't even, it's an abstraction, because we want cybernated systems to replace people's trains of thought when it comes to decision-making processes for the whole of society, in the sense of how things are distributed, in the sense of how we utilize certain resources, in the sense of the technicals of society. All government ever should have been is a technical construct. But as evolution has moved forward, it's become a personal thing. It's a group of mafias. It's a perpetual state of war that exists. Economies are at battle. Economies abusing each other just as businesses abuse each other. So it's an entirely different manifestation. As far as the specifics of your question, what I just said is basically how we distinguish between the two. If you want to see what I would say just really hell on earth, just let the banks continue to expand. Let money be put all onto digital chips with no transparency, and watch the world get unified in a monopolistic sense by the corporations and the banks. And that's going to be as oppressive as can be, because all of the elements of oppression are already built into the mentality of those organizations and of themselves. In a word, fascism. So you have to recognize that. Now, people always say to me, I'm contradicting myself in these films, saying, they say, you're promoting one world government again. I thought we were against that. I'm like, no. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely when power is rewarded. What is power? We don't want anyone to have power. We want full transparency in a cybernated system where everyone has access to it in one way or another. People can affect it. If you don't know what I'm describing, you can read the Activist Orientation Guide. It's a cybernated complex with everyone having access, full transparency. Anyone on the planet can know what everyone else knows as far as resource management and what is happening. It could easily be done and tracked through satellites and different sensor systems that we can develop, and computers generate all of the parameters needed. And what you tend to find is that the efficiency will be utterly self-evident. No one has to decide to, say, take a resource from here and move it to here because of some scarcity. Everything is in place, so therefore the system reacts automatically based on the simple logic of sustainability and efficiency. And once those parameters are set up, and the programming is actually quite simple, monitoring is certainly simple, and allocation could certainly be simple. There's tons of machines in existence today that do just that. If a machine starts to run out of oil, it can have an adapter that's connected to it. It goes to another machine, and the oil deposit will be filled up in that machine. That's a random example, but that is the basic train of thought. So we would definitely want a war against world monopoly. You see this perpetual expansion of, it's the same cycle over and over again, generation after generation, different countries. The difference now is that it's a digital world, and the empire can expand in ways that are much more insidious and much more under the surface than what it used to be in the past with just global physical warfare. Now we have economic warfare. There's all sorts of things that can be done by the powers that have the most monetary resources. They can do speculative raids against third world countries without the countries even knowing what just happened. In other words, hedge funds can take loans from their commercial bank friends. They can margin it to the hilt at 20 to 1. They can have hundreds of billions of dollars go and short the currency of a small third world country, shove it down, destroy their economy, destroy their jobs, and boom, that country has to now take loans from the same basic corrupt cartel through, say, the World Bank or the IMF. There's a whole new world out there, so we have to ward against this economic imperialism, which is coming to fruition. As far as the fantasy notions of world government, I apologize for my tangent on this subject, but the fantasy notions that have been put forward by the religious community, where they say that you're going to have a one world government and a one world religion, and they make this fantasy out of it that it unfortunately has a superstitious basis. I totally see totalitarianism coming into fruition, as it has repeatedly, but it could come to fruition on a massive scale, especially if money is continued to be money is the controlling mechanism of society. It's a pretty easy thing. You can see it happening very easily, and it already is happening, unfortunately, in different areas. So that is definitely to be feared, and other things I could say on that, but I think I've stated enough, and I want to try and get to these questions before Jacque and Roxanne come on. Number 2, now that videos are no longer available on Google, will you just upload it to another video hosting service? Yes, I will. There's half a dozen other services out there. Even just .sub is efficient enough. It's a decent quality, and it automatically lets people do subtitles. So I never liked Google to begin with. It was just the norm. Number 3, you mentioned on your last radio address that you would vote for Ron Paul if he ran again to be poetic in some way. I was wondering if you ever voted in your life, and if so, who did you vote for? And when it came to the presidential arena, I've always voted. Growing up, it's not until recently I realized what a fairly vain issue it is. There's a place to vote. There's a poetic element there. I mean, I voted for Ron Paul if he ran again, or Dennis Kucinich. The system's there. Unfortunately, the public continues to support the system, so it's difficult because once it's past a particular threshold, there is an efficiency to voting, but only to an extremely limited degree. What would be beautiful is if they held an election and no one showed up. That would be absolutely incredible. A 1% turnout for the entire U.S. election. That would be the point of a massive overhaul, because it shows the public just doesn't care about the people anymore that are in power, because hopefully they understand that they all play the same basic game and they're all locked into the same basic frame of reference. So I think you vote in a temporal sense. I don't. When I say reject the political system, I mean that in the broad psychological sense. You have to understand what the system is. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be somewhat active. It goes back to my old analogy of, it's actually not quite applicable. Well, it can be. I'll state it anyway. If you have a person if you have an immediate issue, and it's dire right then you have to participate in the system that will resolve that issue. If you see the issues repeatedly and constantly, you have to do that, and half of your participation should be dedicated towards resolution within the system. But the other half should be focused on the larger order of things and why these problems continually arise. And that's the root cause foundation. Politics doesn't address any form of root causes. It doesn't deal with resources. It doesn't deal with planetary functionality or social functionality on a real level. It's only dealing with them at a monetary, superficial level in a heavy self-interest-based collusion with the constituents that are in its inner circle. So I think that's pretty transparent. Number 4, in times of economic downturn, won't the military-industrial system force our country to seek war in order to escape the current recession? Well, there certainly is historical precedent for that. World War II was known to have stimulated industry enough to pull America out of its depression, at least on some level. I'm not quite sure if it works anymore, though, and that's an interesting point. We're already in 2 wars still, and it doesn't seem to be helping anything. I think it has to do with the fact that war now isn't mobilized by most people's contributions. Most of the technical aspects that generate war in the steel industry and what have you are done by machines. So there aren't that many people. I don't know this for sure, but I bet if you compared the percentage of the population in America that was providing resources and labor for the Second World War, you'll find that percentage today is extremely limited, extremely small. And I think that has to do with technological renovation. Heavy machinery is building these massive planes. There aren't people with with welding guns that are doing this anymore. So I think that's part of it. And, historically, I don't know. I do fear that, obviously. It's also a major distraction, too. If certain companies are losing money and the only way they can figure to make more money is to go to war, well, that's a motivation to do so. But I'm not quite sure if it still works anymore, as far as the broader thing, pulling people pulling this whole society out of depression. Number 5. Once the U.S. official chapters are set up, what are some changes, events, or projects we should expect to see utilizing this newfound connection between groups? The chapters are, I guess, well, in a sense, they're a section of the communications team, and lecture circuits will eventually be organized through those states. So the ideal is to establish, we'll use America as an example, to establish lecture teams in each central area of the continent and the country, and have them work certain states. So if I'm in New York and the New York site would hopefully have all the information for that, hopefully be a place that people would go to, as opposed to the main international site. The lecture and communications team of that area would find resolve and find a place to work on those independent U.S. chapter sites. So that's one aspect of it. As far as events, obviously, if you want to hold an event, hold a film screening, everyone should know by now that I don't require approval. And I look the other way when it comes to people charging. I just ask that you charge much less and try to cover all of your finances. Only cover your finances. As far as projects, I think that comes down to the lecture team. It's going to take a severe amount of dedication. In a lot of ways, the state chapters or any kind of regional chapter are almost more important than the main site, because there's only so much that I can do and that the people that navigate the main site can do. So I hope that people take it very seriously. They're slowly coming about, the U.S. state chapters. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. If you've sent me your state chapter, by the way, and I haven't posted it yet, just bear with me. I'm quite behind on my general administrative stuff right now. Number 6. In discussions of the Venus Project, we talk of science from an industrial or engineering perspective. What about the biological sciences? What is the Venus Project's position on honest biomedical research involving animal studies? I assume you mean testing on animals. What is the feeling towards testing on animals? There was more to this question I'm not going to read, but it has to do with the ethics, I assume. We have to deal with the reality that research has to be done in live settings with different organisms. There's always that issue of ethics. No one wants to see anything suffer. I think humane treatment of lab mice has a place. It's just a sad reality that that's how research has to be done in life. It becomes a gray area and a chain of you know, a chain of what you find relevant, what each individual finds relevant to the issue. For example, if you walk through the Amazonian rainforest, every time you take a step, you're killing thousands of little organisms, parasites, termites, ants. It's unbelievably how robust life is on the planet. So where is the degree that's drawn as far as you know, what is the ethic drawn? And I think we've established that pretty well in this culture. We don't want to see things suffer. We don't see people testing things on human beings. We keep going down the ladder until the organism gets smaller and smaller. And the smallest level we can utilize without abusing that organism, hoping that they don't suffer, but doing the research that needs to be done. This is just one of those areas that is unfortunately reality. We wouldn't have the modern science ingenuity that we have today if we didn't have the experimentation that was done. I'm not saying that a lot of it has been good. There's been some horrific medical culminations, absolutely amoral and utterly unethical throughout society, throughout history, excuse me. It's really just a matter of understanding what we can do. The ethic issue, it's a mood issue. It has to do with what the culture can tolerate and understanding the benefit of it. I mean, everything is life on this planet, and suffering, unfortunately, seems to be a part of it. Everything is in cycles to some degree. If mice can be genetically engineered, say, not to feel pain, and their reactions, could still be equal in the sense of scientific observation, and that might be an interesting way to think about it. But I can't give you an answer to that. It's always going to be somewhat contentious. But I think it's just important people to understand the process that has to be we have to go through in order to achieve certain goals and certain understandings. And dealing and experimenting on life, unfortunately, is a reality at this stage. Maybe we can find ways where that isn't necessarily the case. Number 7, do you consider it a possibility that a person with considerable wealth and influence in the world of business or finance could be an asset to the movement? This is, of course, assuming you believe a rich person is capable of believing in an equal and thoughtful society such as the Venus Project proposes. I have a hard time imagining it myself, but anything is possible naturally. Well, I agree with you. I made this point in the presentation in London. People ask, what if, say, Bill Gates wanted to help out the Venus Project? Well, obviously that would be wonderful. But if you look at Bill Gates' patterns, if you look at what he donates right now, and I'm not trying to offend or insult Bill Gates, but based on what his patterns are, you look at his net worth, you look at what he donates on average every year to his organizations, and you find that it's just a tiny percentage of his worth. It's I've been in the subway trains in New York City, and I've watched a homeless person take change out of his cup and give it to another homeless person walking by, probably giving away half of his entire net wealth at that moment. So there's something that happens when people gain lots of money. They become establishments and they become corrupt. There's a reason why those old cliches of the old miser that won't even give a penny to somebody are in existence. There's a social distortion, psychological distortion that seems to manifest the more and more wealthy people become. So that's the barrier. I'd love to see someone, an eccentric, say, turn the other cheek. Say someone who never had to deal with the culmination of money, who somehow inherited tons of money, and they finally discover upon our concept, and they're willing to put forward the $10 billion to build, say, a huge research center. Well, that would be wonderful, and I would certainly leave those options open. I mean, that would be more than we could ever hope for. But we'll see what happens. It certainly goes against the grain of the pattern that's been set up, though, as far as what money does to people's perception. Number 8. Have you read The Ragged-Trousered Philanthropists by Robert Tressel? Both share similar ideas of the Zeitgeist Movement. It is somewhat depressing as it shows others have been saying such for over a century, and yet it has even gotten worse. What does the Zeitgeist Movement offer that is unique and will succeed where so many others have failed? Well, first of all, back to the point about the book, yes, it's been known for quite a while that we have the ability of technology to do things far beyond what the public, of course, knows, and that the ideal, Thorstein Veblen and all of these individuals early in the 20th century, talked about different ideals of the leisure class and things that should have come to fruition, but they haven't, and that's because the economic system won't allow it. The mechanics of the system can't allow this type of natural progression to more free time. In fact, the absolute reverse has occurred. Now, for example, you used to have family scenarios where one person would raise the children and someone went to work, and there was a freedom there. Now, I've rarely met any family where both parents don't work. It's extremely rare. So things have become more constricted, I think, in a lot of ways. It's very interesting. Rather than assuming that the state will allow the natural progression to manifest, we, the Zeitgeist Movement, are going to have to make it happen. It's obvious, and I'm going to present these scenarios in the third film to make the point specifically, talking about transition. I will address transition in the third film very specifically. And one of the issues is we could do it step by step. We could lower the workday to 4 days a week. We could slowly have machines take over, put into positions. We could slowly reduce attributes that are related to finance. Basically what it means is we would slowly make obsolete the stratification of classes and the wealthy too. And that's where the barriers come up. The progress could be logical and could unfold, but you have to remember that it's making the entire economic system obsolete. So it's a step towards the obliteration of the entire system. So there's only so far you can go with that if you look at, hence the name establishment, hence the survival mechanisms that are built into that. I wonder if that's possible, and again, it will be explored. I totally see the logic in that, but I think it's going to have to happen in the reverse. It's going to have to happen in a way that the people finally wake up to the understanding, not the establishment. And that's what I've talked about pretty frequently. The people, the masses, understand it, and then they lobby, so to speak, the establishment. The establishment doesn't move forward, then the people have a tremendous amount of power not to participate in the establishment once those numbers are large enough. I've said this before. In America, if 60% of all Americans 1 year flat refuse to pay their federal income taxes or any income taxes, then the United States government would have absolutely no recourse. They couldn't possibly prosecute that many people. It would cost them probably more money to engage those prosecutions than the taxes that would be brought in. That might be a stretch, but you see my point. So the power of the people is really what it comes down to, and it's the education of the masses, not the manipulation of the establishment. I see the point of manipulating the establishment. I think there are improvements, and we have to work with improvements. I would like to see, certain advancements occur. It would be an amazing step to have, well, I hate to use the word socialize, but that is really the word. Say you had all electricity socialized. Say you had the mechanical infrastructure to set up the production of electricity through renewable means and make it freely available to everyone with no charge whatsoever. It could be done right now. We have the technological ability to do it, and we certainly have the abundance of energy to do it. But energy, of course, is one of the most profitable industries there is. So, you see the barrier there. Number 9. In order for us to see ourselves as one human family, I think it would be wise to show the scientific research that supports this idea. There have been studies into the origins that prove we are one human family. For instance, there is a documentary called The Real Eve, which is quite comprehensive on the topic. Will you be including this information in Zeitgeist 3? I've always included that information generally. I think in few instances I've denoted the human family, but it's in gesture, it's in a poetic sense. I mean, obviously, you don't have to think too creatively or go dig too deep to see the fact that the species multiply. I mean, it comes from a central source through time. It's not, people don't just pop onto the planet from other places. So we're all very much related through our genealogy. It's amazing if you track your genealogy, who you're actually related to. It's always a nice party topic. People will say, oh, I'm related to J.S. Bach, or I'm related to Beethoven. Then you'll have those scary people say, oh, well, I'm kind of related to Hitler, it seems. And it's funny because the bloodlines are just absolutely interconnected the farther you go back. So I haven't seen the documentary you're talking about, but I think that is a great point. In Africa, we're all apparently originated from Africa, at least that's what the science shows. And it's not unheard of to think that, a small group of people have produced the entire population. So that certainly points out the fact that we are all, in fact, one family and should have the philosophical ramifications that family does today in the smaller context, but we've, of course, deviated from that. Number 10. Do you find it ironic that some of those who supported Zeitgeist 1, such as the conspiracy crowd, are now heavy opponents of the movement? Well, there are some people out there that do not support this whatsoever, that were in favor of the first film, and no, it doesn't surprise me at all. There's always that threshold. People have their larger scale ideas and their ignorances and their assumptions. No, it doesn't. It's not ironic. I don't find it surprising. It's just the way things go. In the third film, we'll do the exact same thing. I mean, some people that think they understand this movement, once the third film comes out, they most likely will feel even more bewildered. I hope that isn't the case. I hope those that are actually paying attention. If you listen to anything that I and Jacque have said over the course of all of this time, the third film should be virtually no surprise. It's just going to be put in a specific way that's highly angled, and hopefully get the point across to those that are not familiar with the movement. The target is not the choir. It's going to be those that haven't really given this much thought. Number 11. In our society, there are various videos found in archives and on the internet which could be considered disturbing. I'm talking about videos such as the slaughter of animals, terrorist videos, and people being killed. Should these videos be destroyed to protect people in the future, or in the future who could be damaged by them, or should they be kept? I don't think the censorship of anything is necessarily regarded. I think people will look back at the archives of the 20th and 21st century with a great deal of dis-ease and wondering what the hell was going through the mind of the population. They'll also understand this in the course of natural evolution. That's what it is. It's no different than us looking back at Stone Age man and the very primitive attributes that anthropologists tell us about today. The only difference is with the media that we have now, it is fascinating to think about the reality that many thousands of years from now, people will actually be able to hear and see what society was like that long ago. And I think that is quite profound, and I'm not sure what the ramifications of that will be, but I do think the culture will evolve to a point where they look back and they begin to just reflect at it as a primitive construction. It's not that it doesn't influence them, it becomes an anthropological perspective, and I think that's what will happen. I think people will move beyond the influence. They'll laugh at our television commercials. They'll be horrified by our glamorized depictions of violence and our absurd competitive mentalities. It would be laughed at when kids in their 6 years old, or 6 or 7 or 8 years old, in their little anthropology class in school, and they show video of television shows like Are You Hot? And they will just sit and glance in horror at how stupid the earlier cultures actually were. Number 12. Hello, Peter. Though the concept took time to get accustomed to, I'm all in favor of decisions being technical in nature and being assigned to computers. However, I believe that some issues could not be dealt with through this process. I have only thought of 2, well, he says 3, but I'm only going to list 2. I've only thought of 2 so far, but perhaps you could address these specifically. Number 1, he says that what subjects of education should be compounded of, and the overall shaping of it. And the second one is the issue of GMO and GEO, or genetically engineered or modified organisms. Okay, I think you're extending this a little bit too far. The assignments of computers to decision-making at the earliest stages is simply the running of technical society. As time moves forward, it's been documented by some very ambitious individuals, such as Ray Kurzweil, that in artificial intelligence, and I might ask Jacque this question too, that artificial intelligence will eventually exceed the ability of the human being in a way that is nearly creative. And if that is to be the case, if that does happen, then it's all a matter of how we point that intelligence. So if we have a problem that's extremely complex that we can't figure out, the components can't be put together, but a programmed computer can assess the components correctly and figure it out, well, that's a powerful decision-making tool. It's not something that we should fear. The issue, about education, education should be relatively obvious to us, and it's going to be an ongoing development, too. It's not that It's not that there's a fixed education. Can computers decide who gets taught what? At this stage, no. I don't think it's even necessary. I think it's just a general inferential logic. Humans can come up with the obvious roles that are necessary in society for people to live and contribute in a balanced and healthy way. Obviously, people wouldn't be learning things like advertising and stuff like that in a new society. They would be learning issues of creative thought, of how to apply engineering and science. I think creativity is the most powerful thing that will be taught. As far as your other issue of genetically engineered and modified organisms, I mean, if I understand your question correctly, computers making those decisions, again, is a moot point with me because there's so many other decisions that the computers are going to be more responsible for. I don't really see that as an issue, too. The human being still has a say. I hope those fears that you see in films like I, Robot and stuff like that don't get to people. If we ever do achieve a point where computers are that intelligent, then we have to reassess what our usage of them are. And again, their malevolence is an illusion. To think that there's going to be malevolence from them is utterly unfounded. So I hope I answered your question. I think you're being a little too specific and not seeing the broader scope of the application of technology and artificial intelligence. So, I mean, humans still are going to be investigating and thinking and making contributions and figuring out what to do with society. The computers are the tools simply to do it. And that in and of itself is enough to make outrageous. I mean, we're smart enough to do that. We can think in a logical manner. The computers are there to make sure we don't get overly emotional. They keep us in check. And that's we have to maintain our objectivity in our approaches. And once the monetary system is removed, once vested interest is removed, you'll see an entirely different human culture focused on sustainability and efficiency because they're not motivated by the blind and narrow self-interest that is dominant today. So I hope that helps with the question. Number 13. What are your feelings and thoughts on a guaranteed income system as a possible economic transition tool to a resource-based economy, rather than perhaps waiting for the current economic system to collapse before implementing a resource-based economy? Well, the absolute guaranteed income system, if you're willing to do that, why not just go the full route? The dangers of a guaranteed income system is that someone has to decide what you get. Money is not real. It doesn't represent anything. It's a total concoction. There's no model that you can think of, at least that I'm aware of, that can enable some type of egalitarian monetary system that wouldn't lead to some form of abuse. And mainly because the structure of the economic system would still remain, so the self-interest is still there. So if someone sends you $1,000 a month, you have to buy into the system to get your resources. Money is still made. Therefore, the gaming mentality is still there. And you can see all sorts of collusions and problems come about with say, whoever the governing body is, whatever subcommittee is organizing who gets what in this type of hyper-welfare state that you're describing. You can see how they could be manipulated by industry at large for the benefit of industry, just like they're being manipulated right now. So the ability for corruption is still far too profound. I mean, we already have guaranteed income for the super lower classes, and as a transition tool, I don't see that as a possibility. I see that as an extremely negative outcome. For example, if the technological unemployment and the contradiction of capitalism continues, you're going to eventually see stratification very different from what you see today. You're going to have the absolute wealthy elite. You're going to have the super small middle class, which runs the machines and does all the basic maintenance and oversees the factories. And they're going to have this colossal welfare state with people on fixed incomes given their money so they can go out and support themselves in society. That is just a recipe for utter destruction. You can't have a stratified system, and that's basically what you're denoting. It would be impossible for that to work. And other central planning experiments throughout history and communism and things like that, it has always led to oppression with that type of structure. So we might as well go the full length. I understand your angle about transition, but if it's based on arbitrary regulation as opposed to resource data, it's extremely dangerous. Number 14. How much freedom do you think children will have in a resource-based economy? Do you think they will continue to be overly protected like they are today, or do you think there will be less of a need for guardian protection in a resource-based economy? At what age will people gain full independence in a resource-based economy? I'm not sure about that question. That's a complex question. I think the general patterns that exist today, the cultivation of children, is what it is. It seems to hold some type of consistency. I think kids can learn a lot faster and grow up, so to speak, a lot faster. I mean, physiological development is one thing. If a kid isn't fully physiologically developed, I mean, there's always going to be a learning process too, and parents in education do have a role to get a child and going in the right direction, because the susceptibility of children is absolutely profound. What you do to a child at a young age can carry with them both in their psychology and in their health for the rest of their life. I made that point in the presentation in London, and hopefully that will be online soon in a high-quality way. So, I don't know the answer to that question. I think it comes down to how efficient the society becomes. It wouldn't surprise me if a kid could go out on his own at, say, 16. I mean, I don't see why that isn't possible. It's really what the system manifests. So, as far as being protected, I don't think there'll be the paranoia that you see today. There's a lot of unhealthy paranoia that exists, mainly to sell things like helmets and stuff like that. But I mean, the obsession with children has become a gimmick in a lot of ways. I mean, why? Well, we're supposed to, the children are our future. What happens when the children grow up? We save the children, but we ignore them when they become adults. Why? There's this, for example, the anti-abortion people, they have this bizarre compulsion to assume that this fetus is more important than the soldier that's being slaughtered in Iraq. I mean, if they were against that, if they had any type of logic to their train of thought, they wouldn't lock arms and block med clinics. They'd be standing in front of every army recruitment center in existence if you were considered pro-life. You don't see that because it's more of a religious distortion, but that's for another conversation. So I hope I answered your question. I don't really know the answer to that. I might ask Jacque that as well. That's a lifestyle question. We'll see. Number 15. On last week's radio address, you contradicted yourself a little bit on the topic of human nature when discussing children's health. You said, quote, "We are biosocial machines." And then when we're discussing sexual urges, you said, "We're not biological machines." He's comparing the term biosocial machines to biological machines. I hope I understand your question. There seems to be three parts to this question. Well, biosocial machines is not the same as just biological. Biological machine would be a slave to your biology, genetics. A biosocial machine, which is what we are, is a machine that's both biological but influenced by society. Biosocial. So there isn't a contradiction there. I state we are biosocial machines, and it's time we accept that. And then in the other one, I say we're not slaves to the hormone. We're not biological machines. And there's a huge spectrum of behavior that has changed and simplified. And that's the statement that I made. So I hope that's clear. It's we're not slaves to our biology. We're a composite of our biology and society, so to speak. That's a loose way to put it. The second part of your question is, where do you draw the line between an organism's? Excuse me. Where do you draw the line between a? Oh, I'm sorry. Where do you draw a line between a physiological requirement and a sociological desire? Well, that's an interesting question. The physiological requirement should be fairly obvious. It's what you need to survive and maintain optimized health. A physiological desire is typically a contrivance. In our culture now, is pushed forward by a form of materialism. So, physiological desire in the sense of, say, a really overly gratuitous form of dessert could become a pattern of desire based on chemical reactions. If you take in enough sugar, you're going to have this built-in requirement to want more and more sugar, at least until you become diabetic. But you set up these patterns that society has set up. There's salt and sugar. These become very addictive. I think that the excesses, there's a median utility. We'll use that term, median utility. And where's the line drawn? Well, the line isn't really drawn. I guess it has to do with a gradient from health to unhealth. I mean, in the context of what you're describing. I'm not sure if you're talking about sexuality or general health, but I'm going to assume it's general health because that would make the most sense. So physiological desire is often very contrived in our culture. It's imposed just like every other form of imposed materialism coming from industry. So, and it's also there's a great comment in one of the books I'm reading by Sapolsky. He talks about the fact that it's so difficult to be healthy. It's it's so hard to there's very few avenues in our culture today that will allow for an optimization of efficiency or health. It's always, you have to fight your way into the what you say are physiological requirements, the bare necessities, and we're instead imposed upon by our supposed physiological desires. So a kid who's given McDonald's as he grows up develops this taste for that type of food. Someone who drinks soda all day long and they never drink water, I've met people like that, they can't even drink water. It's amazing. It's just boring to them, and they've countered it with their physiological response. So I hope that answers your question. It's imposed. I think there needs to be a median utility between the two. Not that there shouldn't be some form of pleasure in things, but I think you'll find that it becomes pleasurable to be extremely healthy too. There's just so much distortion in that realm that I couldn't summarize it for you. But I hope what I stated makes sense. Median utility. And the third part of this question, considering potential problems with overpopulation, is the ability of humans to completely control their sexual urges a desirable one? Well, I'm not sure if that's as relevant as the control of fertilization itself. So it's more the education. I think I know what you're shooting at. It's the education of the people to understand what they're doing, and that's basically it. I mean, anyone can run up to somebody and kill them if they want to, but they don't. Anyone can produce a child if they want to, but they don't. There's a reason for it. We have all sorts of different reasons. A lot of people won't have children today because of the economics required. Some people, they can't afford the children, and that's an hindrance for them. I think in time it'll expand to something a little bit more rational, and people will not have children because they understand what they're doing. They understand the effect it has on the environment. In other words, they'll understand the carrying capacity of the earth. So when they bring a child into the world, it'll become something special. It's not just this arbitrary thing that's done, for just because of ignorance, or there's many problems with childbearing today, to the extent where people are just flagrantly doing it. The poorer populations tend to have the most kids. They also tend to have the most resources of protection, and they also tend to have the most aberrancies of the production of children too, and that's also something to think about as well. So the society, this is an aside, but the stratification has created distortions, and it's no wonder that criminal mentalities tend to come out of deprived, poverty-stricken. Most criminal mentalities, per capita percentage, tend to come out of poverty-stricken environments. So, going back to your original question, you're asking me another extremely complex question. It really comes down to education. It's just education. It has nothing to do with the sexual urges. It's a matter of just controlling themselves and understanding what they're doing when it comes to actually producing a child, not necessarily the realm of sex itself. Number 16. It worries me that less than 10% of the movement's members have signed the Venus Project petition. What are your thoughts on this? Venus Project petition that's on the homepage. I was hesitant to even put that up on the homepage, mainly because the company that's doing it, it's kind of a scam, the way the organization is set up, because you're submitting all this information to their database. A petition is good to kind of gauge certain things as far as participation. I really don't care much for the petition. It doesn't bother me. Not that many people have signed up. I think a lot of people haven't signed up because they don't want to give all their information to this company. So, we could do a different petition, and I probably should have done this myself, where it's just a simple program, and we program the petition in. We don't have to use a third-party site. That might be a reason why I'm kind of indifferent to that petition. Petitions are a dime a dozen. I don't think petitions are going to do very much in the future. Let's see, I have a few more minutes before I bring Jacque and Roxanne on. Number 17. Hello, Peter. I consider that Wikipedia is an extremely powerful and popular tool for spreading knowledge and information of all kinds. For that reason, I was disappointed to find out that the Wikipedia article for the Zeitgeist Movement was a mere few lines without actually explaining the ideas and propositions behind the movement necessary. I think it would be greatly helpful if we could expand and correct these Wikipedia articles to prevent unnecessary negative publicity and to transmit our message properly through one of the most far-reaching internet tools in existence. Is there already any team or project taking care of this? I couldn't agree with you more. It was my hope that people would take it upon themselves to help out with stuff like that. I think, and they certainly have. If anyone out there, it doesn't take long to get a Wikipedia account, and if you think you can contribute, please do so. I could set up an official project, so to speak, for people to maintain the Wikipedia through the communications team, and I guess I might have to do that. But and anyone's free to do that. I mean, if you understand the movement and you understand how Wikipedia works, please just take a moment to do it. Anyone could do it. If 10 people out of all of you decided to just kind of monitor with the Wikipedia entries and make sure that they're not getting vandalized or false information is put in or they become skewed. I know the Zeitgeist Movement site has been absolutely ravaged from all sides. It's not up until recently that it finally saw some type of balance. It was probably one of the most edited Wikipedia entries there is. Sure, please help with the Wikipedia. That is, people do look at that. That is relatively important. Number 18. With the growing number of members and attention, I question your ability to continually answer all questions, even if you persevere. I think it's unwise to waste time. First of all, the knowledge database, which has been set up, but I don't have time to input things into it yet. That's in the works. So there's going to be a knowledge database which will put all of this stuff in there with answers done by myself or Jacque. So that programming's there. We just haven't had a chance to do it. I will eventually not be taking endless questions, and when people do submit a question, they will have to search through this database first. Luckily, when I filter the questions, I can basically remember other questions that have been asked, even though I'll answer the same question a few times. Usually they come from different angles, which is why I do it. But yes, we'll have a knowledge database, so that should help out a lot. I'll slowly develop that, and I'll hopefully bring in some volunteers to begin to set that up so all the questions can be put in, and then maybe a couple times a day I can get in there and start putting in this information. And those that have made transcripts have been very helpful, and I really applaud those that have taken the grueling time to try to figure out what I'm talking about and all my fragmented sentences to make those transcripts. That was really wonderful that you've done that, and that'll come very helpful when I go back and create that knowledge database. Number 19, Peter, what is your position on the Luddite fallacy, the argument made by economists that advantages in technology will never cause widespread unemployment because technological advance will always create more jobs than it destroys. My counter to this argument is that past technological advancement has only increased the efficiency of human labor, and that it is only with recent and future advances in robotics and artificial intelligence that we can actually eliminate the need for human labor. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. You answered the question for me. For every new piece of technology that is used in automation, maybe we'll say hypothetically, and this is just throwing this out there, but I think the ratio is probably accurate, 10 people might get a new job for the creation of this automation equipment while 1,000 people are laid off. So while it is true that that jobs are created, they don't compare. I mean, it's completely obvious they don't compare. And the idea that the economists put forward is that there will always be a new emerging sector. Well, the next sector beyond the service industry is the information sector by most economists' arguments. The information sector is an utterly digital sector. It's a research center. Granted, people can do it, but there's machines in certain labs that are doing research now. They can do research on different microorganisms, and they can statistically feedback results and compare results, and they can begin to think, so to speak, and they can pinpoint conclusions. There have been some experiments done with dynamics and laws of nature that were set up by machines, and the machines were actually able to generate the laws of nature themselves, retroactively, of course, because the people already understood them, but they were able to make a machine that could actually do that, which I thought was quite amazing. So I agree with you. It's a fantasy for these economists to say this because it's statistically unproven. That we keep moving the jobs keep going somewhere, but I have a feeling we're going to reach a point where they can't go anywhere else. And back to the other point of increased efficiency, that's the clincher. That's really the issue. We have the ability to create more with less people in a much more efficient way. And if we intend to maintain the population that we have to move into an automated system. We have to, because the human population can't handle the gross redundancy and gross monotony and drudgery, so to speak, of our current system. Let me rephrase that better. We can't. The inefficiency because of human labor right now, because of the positions that they're in arbitrarily, because of the need for maintaining employment statistics, this can't exist. We have to maximize everything. We don't want 9-to-5 jobs. We want jobs to run 24/7. Factories to run 24/7. That's how you create an abundance. The Luddite fallacy is a fallacy. Number 20. Peter, in a previous question I mentioned there would inevitably be a mixed system of money and automation, for not everything can be made abundant or automated instantaneously. You agreed with me, so we need the best monetary system possible. If you come to this realization, then it is not in our best interest to still be in, if you come to this realization, then it is not in our best direct interest to still be involved. Is it not in our best direct interest to still be involved with current monetary policy? After reading Web of Debt, you must acknowledge that our lives can be much better lived with a debt-free money system. Yes, this ignores the phenomenon of technological unemployment, but please answer my question. But please don't answer my question with this as the main point. No, I'm not going to answer your question about technological unemployment. I'll answer your question about the fact that the system is still set up as being parasitic. So even without a debt-based monetary system, you're still going to have, you won't have as much intrinsic pressure on the population and forced in positions of servitude, but you'll still have all the same mechanisms that run it. And I agree with you. I would love to see a transitional debt-based monetary system. I agree with a lot of the things that Ellen Brown pointed out in Web of Debt, but it isn't the end-all, because it still maintains the same system. So I totally agree with you. If those things could happen, that would be wonderful. But you're talking about the very fabric of the system. And if we're willing to change the very fabric of the system, we might as well go the full length. But we'll see what happens. I completely agree with you. I just find it difficult for that ever to come about because of the establishment powers that are there. It's just as difficult for that to occur, as, in my opinion, as what we're talking about in a lot of ways. Because it's dealing with the very fabric of just the very mechanism of the system. If they didn't make money out of debt, how would they make the money? There's the question that I pose to you. It has to come from something. It has to generate from some form of pressure in order to keep cyclical elements going. And that's all I'm going to say about that right now, because Jacque and Roxanne are now waiting for me. So I'm going to click over to them. Jacque and Roxanne.
Hi, Peter.
Hey.
Oh, Peter.
Hanging in there. How you guys doing?
Great.
Good. There's a big lightning storm here in Florida, so we may get disconnected.
Okay. Well, if you do, I guess try to call back. It's actually kind of storming a little bit here too, so hopefully you guys will be okay. So I've been going through questions, and I wanted to ask you guys about lifestyle and certain infrastructure issues related to the mechanics of the system of the resource-based economy. There have been a lot of questions about this, and I think we've covered a lot of other interesting points regarding psychology and sociology and education and human behavior. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about some specifics. For example, distribution centers, the way people gain access to things. In a general summary, Jacque, if you wouldn't mind, the very notion of automation and transportation regarding getting goods from one place to another, regarding how people gain access to goods. Could you briefly summarize how distribution will work in this system?
I can only attempt to do that.
Sure.
Okay. From the farms to the supermarkets of the future, most of that is automated. The harvesting of the crop, the packaging of the crop, but packaging becomes standard size. In other words, for a family of 4 or 10, the packaging will be uniform packaging, so we don't have all varieties of size. Most packaging will be square, and most packaging will be biodegradable, will contain nutrients for the soil. So that is only one aspect of it. Another aspect is the distribution centers are like supermarkets, only they're circular. Again, the reason for that is you can park in the area that you're interested in the type of food you'd like to acquire. Now, you don't have to go to the shop, to the acquisition centers. You can do that from the internet or from your laptop in the future. The food will be delivered to the outside of your building automatically and inserted into the back end of the refrigerator or the food storage system. In other words, instead of entering your house with all the packages, they're inserted into the refrigerator automatically, free of the packaging. They're ejected from the packaging into the back end of the refrigerator from the outside. That goes for the water heater and all of the technical elements. If they require any kind of servicing, it's done from the outside. They don't have to go inside the building to do that. That's only one aspect. What other aspect would you like to know about?
Well, I think that's fascinating. The specifics that people often ask about tend to be, say, for example, somebody wanted to gain an automobile. How do you propose? Obviously, we've discussed the idea of access versus property, and I think, for example, it became aware to me that in recent times there has been experimentation with GPS satellite-driven cars. In fact, a company recently has demonstrated that they can drive a car purely from satellite. I believe it was either Mercedes or one of these. And you mentioned automobile distribution. It's a more of a form of access. And not to mention, in the cities, we don't need automobiles. Could you talk a little bit about the evolution of automobiles, how they will exist in this society, and how they relate to the city systems, or how they don't relate to the city systems? Because I know you want a built-in transportation system. So transportation, I guess, is the question I'm asking. And it looks like we might have lost them. Uh-oh. Hold on one moment.
Transportation unit. They're lined up in areas, all transportation units are lined up in areas where you can access them. Today, there are many different automobiles that sit around for 8 hours while people are at work. You have millions of automobiles in America just sitting there for 8 hours. In the future, that would not occur. They would always be in use. You don't have anything sitting around.
Right.
That gives you more access. Do you know what I mean when I say they're sitting around for 8 hours all over the country while the person's at work? Okay. In the future, there'll be transportation units electrically operated with a motorized system built in the wheels directly, so there's no transmission. That makes the car much more efficient in doing that. Now, you have automobiles lined up outside of the apartments or living areas where you can access a car by calling. But automobiles as a system of transportation is really inefficient. The city itself will have built-in transveyors that can take you anywhere within the city in a few minutes, the art centers, schools, distribution centers, or your home.
Right.
Within the cities also, what Jacque is calling a car, we often call a shuttle. We're automating those now, but those would be automated too. They wouldn't be a single person driving, and they'd be taking many people in the directions that they're going in.
A lot like elevators, instead of vertical, they'll be horizontal, turning elevators out sideways.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And obviously, there's so much waste in the automobile and transportation industries that.
Well, remember, Peter, that it's not used. The automobiles aren't used every day.
Right.
They're parked most of the time. But when they're put to use, you get 10 times as much transportation during the transition. But once we build our cities, it'll have built-in transportation, which is much safer, has proximity devices on it, so you can't hit a person or another transportation unit.
And the route from one place to another is direct.
In the event of power failure, there's an automated system that switches over to another circuit.
Right, redundancy. Redundancy is very important, right?
There may be 6 circuits to each operation.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting to point out that redundancy is, quote, unaffordable in our current system, wouldn't you say? And it's very sad. It's very dangerous.
Well, they'll get there eventually, but this system isn't going to last that long.
Right. Okay.
What other aspects of technology would you like to know about?
I think the basic domesticated lifestyle issues are the most common questions, and obviously getting around is not a complex issue. We've discussed the maglev trains, and you've pointed out the use of automobiles. There was one technical question that someone asked me. I wanted to relay this question, and they asked why you use the circular design in your physical structures as opposed to the rigid square design.
Okay. In the circular design, if you go to a supermarket and it's square, the parking lot does not always put you in access of what you want. If the supermarkets today, say, were round, you can park in the area of meat, vegetables, organic foods. In other words, the parking area would be designated and close to the part of the shopping center that you have a need for. Do you understand that?
Yes.
All right. So when you enter a circular shopping center, you start out at one place, and if you walk around, you return to the same place. In a linear market or square market, you have to walk up and back.
Right.
So really, it conserves a great deal of material. It standardizes packaging. The aisles would be more efficient. They can be serviced easier, enter easy, and we can make standard units of different sizes depending on the population.
Right, absolutely. And as far as the physical structures, say, the very nature of a dome structure, you've commented to me that these structures are actually more powerful. They're stronger.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Well, it depends, actually. Sometimes a circular structure might be more efficient, and a dome structure would be more efficient only if you have multi-decks.
Okay.
Otherwise, you waste a lot of space. But remember, most of the buildings are comprised of fireproof material. So you don't have fire engines. You don't have all of the things that you have today.
Right, exactly.
So we conserve a hell of a lot of energy.
Right. That's a great point about safety and security as far as home construction. What kind of materials do you recommend? Is it concrete specifically that you...
It would not be concrete as you know it.
Okay.
It would be concrete that is exposed to a particular process, which I'd rather not describe the identical process, but just a general idea. It'll be foamed concrete. That is, a lot of air bubbles in the midsection, which would serve as an insulator. The concrete would be dense on the outside. Talking about concrete, actually it wouldn't be concrete. It'd be new materials. Maybe many of them will be shape memory materials.
Right. Right. Well, that makes perfect sense.
So the center portion of the wall would not be subject to condensation or heat loss. And the outermost section of the building would be insulated and covered with ceramic material with built-in photoelectric cells. Instead of putting photoelectric cells over your roof, the building material itself is photoactive.
And these shapes not only are very strong and fireproof, but the concrete and steel, like the domes we have here, are termite-proof. You don't have to put a tent over the building and spray it with poisons. And they're about as hurricane-proof as you can get, the way we build them. And the environmentalists don't want to cut down the forest, but a lot of them live in wooden houses.
Yes, isn't that interesting?
So the top of most of the buildings will be electric generators, not necessarily photoelectric cells only, heat concentrators and other methods for generating electricity for operating the distribution centers. And most of the cities will be more than self-sufficient in operation.
Sure. Well, we all know that we have an abundance of energy, for sure. It's simply a matter of harnessing that energy. I know certain companies have been creating nanotechnology forms of photovoltaic heat capturers, and the possible efficiency is truly profound based on the statistics and experiments that they're running. Of course, as you know, it's too expensive in this particular environment for them to do anything with it, and that's a hindrance we have in this society.
Peter, even the nanotechnology would not be necessary, but it would add a great deal. But we have more than enough resources to take care of existing problems.
Absolutely. On that point, I think most people that I run into, they understand they understand the energy issue. They can relate the reality that we have enough energy, but they always pose the question about food, and they always think that because of arable land area that we'll have problems producing enough food for the world's population.
Okay.
Yes.
That will call for hydroponic farms, meaning multi-decked agriculture. Instead of spreading out large farms, we have multi-decked inside a large dome or inside a building in proximity of the city. So not only that, we'll be able to support acre by acre under the sea. In other words, laminated plant life. We have never spent much time growing food in salt water, but the possibilities are enormous in that area. Now, wherever you have poor soil or lack of it, you would have hydroponic gardens. Even in the cities in the sea, you'll notice a large domed area. That's a hydroponic farm.
Right. Yeah, it seems pretty simple to envision, say, an entire skyscraper with stacked hydroponic agriculture.
Yeah, well, a skyscraper would be inefficient for that. We design a special building called multi-decked agriculture with service equipment that travels all around, picks the food, plants the seeds, maintains dynamic equilibrium within the environment.
Isn't it also true that the nutrients that would be used for the hydroponic agriculture could be taken from the ocean itself?
Well, some of it would be. The ocean is loaded, relatively untapped.
Right.
There are people that grow very nutritious foods with the help of sea salt hydroponically.
Fascinating. I think that's it's amazing how people don't put that together, how much possibilities we have. The oceans obviously are a powerful resource, not only from what's in them, but also expanding human civilization into the oceans. Could you describe briefly some of your concepts regarding cities in the sea and how energy would be generated and things of such?
Yes. The reason for the cities in the sea is to restore the reef and explore marine sciences and maintain dynamic equilibrium in the oceans. As you know, the Army some years ago dumped 65 tons of nerve gas off the coast of Miami near the Gulf Stream. So how can you be loyal? How can you love the country if you just obey orders given by pinheads?
Right.
In other words, I'm trying to say that we can restore the oceans to as near a natural condition as possible. The question as to whether people would all be alike or similar in the future, yes, they will be very similar. They will all be against war. They will all be against exploitation of other countries. They will all be against destruction of the environment. Do you understand? So there's nothing the matter with being alike in a sane way.
Right, I couldn't agree more. It's finding that, and that's a beautiful thing too. It's finding that common ground. Obviously, we all have to live. None of us want war. Why would we ever even consider such a thing? It's only in the economic system where people can profit from war that such a thing has materialized.
Yes, it's hardly worth talking anything about this system and the way it operates. It's so inefficient in so many different areas, from our universities to our junior grade schools. We have an old-fashioned method. We have a language that was designed hundreds of years ago, and it's very difficult to talk to people with the language given in our schools. The language of the future will have relevance, always relevance. A lot like mathematics, chemistry, physics, which is not subject to interpretation. The engineering language and chemistry and blueprints are not subject to interpretation. If you develop a blueprint for an automobile or transportation system and you submit it to China, Japan, France, England, it's not subject to interpretation. They turn out the exact product.
Yes, yes.
So I'm saying that it is possible to develop a language that's not subject to interpretation. That's one of the major changes in the future, a language that's coherent. Today we talk at each other rather than to each other. People say things like, have a nice weekend. Why don't they say, have a nice life? Why just the weekend?
Absolutely. No, it's amazing the things that even I say and that we all say commonplace that, of course, make no sense whatsoever.
No, it's automatic because we're brought up with this old world values and we don't know what's missing.
Right.
And people like me, of course, don't get a chance to speak at most universities, so people remain that way.
Right. And I just wanted to mention that a lot of people try and do patchwork in this system. They think if they fight for human rights or for animal rights or for saving the dolphins or whatever, or for no beatings in prisons for young kids, that they get somewhere, but they really don't. It takes just as much effort to fight for an entirely new social design that wipes out all those problems if it's organized and done wisely.
Let's not say it wipes them out. It really surpasses the need for that socially offensive behavior. By making an aberrant environment, you produce aberrant behavior.
Absolutely, and that's one of the most profound realizations that you guys put forward is addressing the root causes of this.
I just want to make sure you understand that. We do that in technology. In other words, when it doesn't work, we have a way of checking what area needs to be dealt with. Technology is wonderful in the sense that it enables us to pinpoint problems. This will have to happen in medicine, biology, all of the physical sciences. For example, some people admire the metal nitinol, or nickel and titanium, or shape memory alloys. That already exists in a seed. A seed contains a memory of the whole oak tree or a palm tree. Every leaf is in the seed. And if we find out how seeds store memory to develop a whole oak tree, imagine what we can do with super memory materials of the future.
Yeah, that's an amazing possibility. I know nanotechnologists use that concept as well. If we could only figure out how to originate everything through programming, so to speak, and obviously with your memory metal concept as well, we could literally grow, say, an entire building, correct?
Right. Not only building, furniture, all kinds of things can be self-generative.
Yeah, that's
like
amazing.
Living systems.
Right.
In other words, you won't require somebody to give you a heart transfer or a kidney transfer. In the future, we'll be able to grow our own kidneys and develop artificial organs that are much more effective than living systems. It's just a matter of appropriations today. You depend on nickels and dimes for medical research. In the future, we give every lab whatever the hell they needed and more, because it's for the benefit of everybody rather than this nation or that nation. In the future, when all the nations join together, think of the amount of money and resources saved in terms of building armaments, navies, armies, which do nothing. You got millions of men there that train to do nothing but destructive behavior. A soldier is a killing machine. Rather than soldiers, we would enable them to go back to school and become problem solvers. Rather than part of the problem, they'll be able to help eliminate most problems. When I say eliminate, I don't mean by force. I mean to outgrow the need for behavior that isn't necessary, such as killing or defense systems.
I couldn't agree more, and I think the same logic as far as resources can be applied to our current corporations. Imagine if the minds of all the people behind the competing corporations, instead of fighting each other, they work together and they use their creativity to create efficient products. You know.
Well, that's true, Peter. Consider the Bureau of Naval Operations, or the Pentagon. What a wasted institution. Yes. If the Pentagon consisted of people that were problem solvers, that knew how to bridge the difference between nations, I'm talking about sociologists, social scientists, you never hear them on television. You never hear what they have to offer. They have to write little books here and there or lecture here and there. All that is kept from the public. If you want to know why it's kept, it's because broadcasting companies, newspapers, depend on commercial advertisements, people to support them, to sell their products.
Right.
In the future, you have no sales personnel. You have no commercials. You have no advertising on TV and radio. It's only information that people can use. It'd be a very different kind of society, so different that I don't think we'd spend any time talking about the old world. The old world would be considered a horror film if you made movies about the present-day society, which is so artificial and corrupt, it would shock people.
I absolutely agree.
I don't like what I'm saying, but I'm just saying it because it's so.
Yes. Well, I think that's a way of viewing things that many people really should consider. They don't consider the aberrancies of their environment. They just think that's the way it is. You know, they
Yes.
can't see anything. They have no limit. They have no perspective otherwise than what's around them. Unfortunately.
Well, Peter, I'd like to be able to answer any other question that you feel you get from people that they don't feel have been sufficiently answered by the Venus Project's proposals.
Well, I have a question that I'll paraphrase. It's sort of a speculative question. I'm sure you're familiar with individuals like Ray Kurzweil. He's another individual.
I am familiar with him.
Mm-hmm.
He has this idea that eventually artificial intelligence will basically surpass the intelligence of humans almost entirely, to the effect where we might become somewhat obsolete in our trains of thought. What is your opinion on those types of fears? Because naturally this leads to other fears of machines taking us over. But let's not worry about that. What is your opinion on artificial intelligence and its application, and where do you think it might lead?
Before you even talk to anyone about intelligence, you say, what do you mean by that? What is your definition of it? Because if people have different definitions for the words they use, you may not be talking with them or to them. You'd be talking around the subject. So when you define the term intelligence, meaning all of the behavior necessary to sustain human life and protect the environment, if that's what you mean by intelligence, I have no doubt that machines will surpass most human performance in most areas. Now, I also feel that these machines will not take over. They'll be assigned tasks. In other words, you have an elevator that takes you to whatever floor you press a button. You press 17, it takes you to the 17th floor. It isn't a machine takeover. The elevators did not take over. They've been assigned the decision-making systems in that area because humans, when they used to operate the wheel that they turned to bring the elevator to the floor, they never quite got it to the floor. They had to move it up and down, and sometimes the door closed on a person. Today it backs off when it touches a human being. We are giving or assigning the tasks that humans can't handle. For example, Peter, computers can handle 1,000 trillion bits of information per second. No group of humans can do that. So when I mention the fact that the future government will be automated, I mean that people can't handle it. And there's so much technology in the world today, in order to handle it, you'd have to have computer access. And with computer access, it'll tell you how many freight trains exist, how many are idle, how many are in motion. It'll tell you the weather potential, the migration of fish, all kinds of information that we don't even deal with today.
Yes. No, I think that's a profound realization to understand the cybernetic complex, which is what you describe. We would need computers in order to comprehend the environment, as you say. It's absolutely dire that we utilize that tool. Yeah, I completely agree. I think people just unfortunately are very uneducated about artificial intelligence, and sadly they're still manipulated by the movies that they see, and that's a question that comes up quite a bit. Along those lines, is regarding automation. I had another question here, and it's a very general question. What they're asking is there any type of physical work that cannot be done by machines, And obviously, we've discussed medical issues that can be developed for the future. But given the spectrum, how would you answer that to someone?
I would only try to answer that, Peter.
Sure.
Saying that let's deal with a skin disease like psoriasis, or when you get the measles, you have little pock marks on your skin, and you go take it to a diagnostician. You go to a diagnostician, a dermatologist. He looks at your skin, and if he's hesitant, he's looking at a pattern he's not quite sure of, so he has to call someone else in. But if you photograph in 3D all known skin diseases and get an analysis of them all over the world, all you have to do is hold your hand up in front of a scanner or expose that portion of your body that has those patterns, and it'll give you the latest approach to that problem. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so you really don't need a diagnostician, because he doesn't know everything in the world about a particular skin disorder, whereas you can get the latest information. You don't need tons of information. All you want is the latest treatment for a given skin disorder, or cystic fibrosis, or any other. You know, a diagnostician, a person that looks at you, looks in your eyes, looks at your skin, looks at your tongue, that can all be automated, because everything that a doctor does, he's been exposed to. He's put in a medical environment, and he shows photographs. He's shown photographs of all kinds of skin diseases. Then he's shown actual conditions other than photographs on people. You can do the same thing with computers. You can make a diagnostician in an hour and a half on a laptop. You don't need to wipe the baby's behind, send it to school, pack its lunch, and wait for a medical degree. You will have medical diagnostic systems that work instantaneously without sitting in the doctor's office for hours or waiting your turn. Now, all this is ridiculous because we don't want to really displace people that fast, but we are going to. The future is much less expensive using automated diagnostic systems rather than human systems. So if you want to cut costs, that's where the answers lie. If you still don't understand me, look at photographs of automotive production. You'll see lines of robots assembling automobiles. It's only a matter of time when all jobs will be phased out. If you go to a supermarket today, you'll notice that they built a system where you insert your card and you can tabulate the cost of things and leave. In other words, they are doing that.
Sure.
And it's just a matter of time. That I hate to see the suffering, though, that goes on between problem solving and the primitive methods we use today.
You have to understand, too, in a resource-based economy, there's no need to fear automation and machines. They would be your friends. They would be helping. But today, in this society, they're abusive. And you can understand why people have a great fear for machines today. You lose your jobs. They bomb countries. A lot of money and resources go towards armament and destructive machines.
Absolutely. I was just reading an article that was released through a commission of a company by the Pentagon, and they're working on semi-autonomous killing machines that can not only kill at their discretion, they can actually consume organic matter and turn it into energy. So to put it very caustically, they can kill somebody, and then the machine can consume the person, and it can power the machine. If you can't think of anything more horrifying than that.
It sounds a little bit like the system we live in now.
Good point. Good point.
Many lives are consumed.
Yeah.
All these movies on the future that are so horrifying are really just an extrapolation of this system into the future. There's nothing positive in movies on the future. We'd like to change that.
Absolutely, it would be wonderful to see that, and I hope the feature film that you guys are slowly developing will serve that function of.
Peter, do you feel that I've answered your questions?
Oh yes, well I have a few more if you don't mind.
Sure, go.
Yeah, the infrastructure. Since we're on the topic of the medical world, you had mentioned in passing to me that rather than have one single hospital in, say, a certain area, you would have medical facilities built into most main structures, correct?
Yes. Dental and medical care, and Phyllis, the equipment for resuscitation would be built in all apartments in the future.
Yes. And it's safe to say that one thing I would like to add to your previous point is that it's utterly irresponsible for us as well not to deal with automation, because as the statistics have proven, these automated constructions can perform much better and much more efficiently than we can. So we're limiting the progress of society by refusing this automation equipment because of the need to preserve jobs. I think that's a very important point.
Well, a very, very important aspect of the future is they ask, well, if machines do so much of everything, what will people do?
Sure.
There's so much we don't know. What causes certain diseases, how to eliminate plaque from the blood vessels. There are thousands of different challenges for laboratories. We will be busy doing useful things rather than girls standing behind the counter where they don't use their heads at all. They just sell existing products, which is very detrimental for the human being. They really don't use their brains when they do a repetitious job. So we hope to phase out all repetitious and boring jobs, which are most jobs. And people will work and administer and work with people, and they'll help solve problems. Imagine every soldier being conditioned to be problem solvers. What kind of world we would have?
Yes, absolutely. I have another question here about the transition. And the question is, in the transition, how do we get food to the poor? And I remember early on you mentioning that we can create nutrient-rich food and send them in condensed ways. Is that...
Yes, well, first of all, are you saying that the Venus Project is in control of the transition? Don't you see it'll probably be the military that's in, as the system begins to break down and riots occur and people become difficult to manage,
right.
What the military will be doing is carrying out the wishes of the establishment, not the Venus Project.
I guess I'm
put it in the hands of the Venus Project. That's entirely different.
Well, that's what I mean. Actually, this is just to make a poetic point. I understand the complications, but if we were to provide for the poverty, like as of right now, there's about 1 billion starving people on this planet, the highest percentage, highest number ever. And
we would extrude food. Do you know what that means?
Yes, but you can go
extrude food from machines like it would look like a loaf of bread, but it would contain all of the nutrients necessary to preserve life. Then it would be compressed and hermetically sealed, so that when you sent the food to another country, it'd be a barrel, say, of food or a long container, and the container would be used with water. So there you have food that's dehydrated and then expanded into vegetable soup. But sending cans of soup is inefficient as hell.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean?
Oh,
we would dehydrate the food in the emergency period. That is, Africa, areas that have insufficiencies, great insufficiency, we would extrude food by the ton. Not only that, we would use the North and South polar regions to store surplus grown food by all nations, and in the event of emergency, you don't have to dig up cans of food at school or a box of oatmeal for the poor. You'd have access to immediate food which is stored in the polar regions to feed people in any national emergency.
Yes, that's brilliant. I think it's very depressing the way our culture approaches the issue of poverty with little quarters you stick in those cardboard things at the side of the cashier, all these very sad attempts that we do.
Peter, that's why I don't spend much time talking about the present society. It's so distorted in so many ways, it would take up all our time and give people no information.
Right.
So I'd have to provide alternative methods.
Absolutely. I have more of a sociology question here that someone asked, and it's a very simple thing they're asking. They comment on how wealthy children that are given, quote, an abundance, so to speak, very often can do very aberrant things like get addicted to drugs or vandalism, and their logic is that they're given an abundance, but yet they still behave in aberrant ways. Would you mind responding to the issue of that.
Yes, that's true, because there's nothing else that these children are given.
Right.
When in our universities today, they are better equipped than ever. I'm talking about the scientific labs. They have more equipment. Some of them have electron microscopes, particle accelerators. But the wars are getting worse. The bombs are getting more destructive and the weapons are getting more destructive. So there's something dreadfully wrong with all our high schools, universities, and school systems, because the schools of the future will not expose you to becoming a doctor, a lawyer, a chemist. You will become a generalist, so no one can use you again to sustain an aberrant system.
Right.
In other words, you do that in your early training in school. You bring up all the races together so that children have no judgment as to whether a person's Oriental or Greek or Jewish or Polish. It's when they get to work on kids in the environment and say, well, you're a Lutheran, you don't play with that little Catholic girl. Or you're a Catholic, you don't play with that little Jewish girl. In other words, parents seem to indoctrinate their kids with their own limitations. So in order to attain a saner world, you have to raise children intelligently, having nothing to... I don't mean to take children away from the parents. I don't mean that. Right. I mean the schools will change the value system of the way most people think about life, themselves, relating to others. They will be taught how to relate to others, how to communicate, how to disagree without getting angry. All those things are absolutely necessary if you wish to preserve the world. This is something I don't like talking about, but serial killers and people like that are made that way by an aberrant society. Members of the Ku Klux Klan are brought up in an area of cerebral insufficiency. And in that way, they join organizations that have values that are completely irrelevant, based on nothing in particular. And it is that sort of system that has to be overcome through education, not the kind of education you have today, or not what passes for education today. Most education are forms of propaganda. The education I'm talking about is how the world works, how the oceans work, what they do to the atmosphere, how the forests and the atmosphere are related, and how people are related to the physical environment.
Absolutely, that makes just so much sense. It's a wonder why everything is so distorted as it is in the present day. I couldn't agree more with that. And back to that other question, I think what the issue is boredom too. A lot of kids that are wealthy are in fact bored. And they haven't been given options. They haven't been given
That's
what
right.
you speak of. And regardless of what they have, a lot of people think that this issue that we describe, if you were to take, it's safe to say, correct, Jacque, if you were to take our culture now and drop them in the middle of a highly efficient, resource-based economy, they wouldn't know what to do, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You have to be. If you want to fly an airplane, you have to be put in an aviation environment. If you want to become a lawyer, you have to be put in a university environment that teaches law. Remember, we always put people in an environment. If you want to be a doctor, you're put in a medical environment.
Yes.
So we will change the environment so that people have adequate information in various fields. And when you talk to them about something new, they will say, I don't know enough about it to offer a decision. What the most difficult thing to learn is how to say, I don't know.
Yes.
Even the very wealthy people today who are considered respectful, they don't even know what to do with their money that's constructive. They go out and buy another gambling casino or put up another hotel. So even those people who have money and do things that are the culture feels is constructive and respectable is really aberrant in itself within this society.
Absolutely. It's no wonder that people who win the lottery tend to blow all their money within the first year or two, becoming broke again, and they tend to simply buy it on huge homes and pool tables, and that's unfortunately all they know. They just it's fascinating.
If people have difficulty with that, Peter, if you ask an Eskimo, what would you like? You can have anything you want. He's not going to say a stainless steel refrigerator.
Right.
It doesn't exist within his culture.
Right.
If he asks a Seminole Indian, you can have anything you want. What do you want? Well, he's not going to ask you for a titanium aircraft, twin engine with pulse jet or ramjet. You can't talk that way.
Right.
So you only talk within the culture that you're reared in.
Yeah.
And your values are all generated by the culture or subculture that you live in. You think you're making your own decisions, but when you're knee-high, just a little child, they start pumping stuff in your head. You're a Lutheran. You're an American citizen. You're a Greek. You got to be proud of it. You're Italian. You have to be proud of it. They pump all that crap in your head.
Yes, absolutely. And the establishment, that's how it maintains control, by making sure that everyone in their society thinks alike in the way that supports the establishment.
You couldn't control people if you did it any different.
Right.
You'd have 4,000 different political parties.
Yes.
And the education supports that as well. If your education, if they enabled you to think critically, you wouldn't stand for this environment. You couldn't get them to go to war.
Absolutely.
War is a supreme failure of nations' ability to bridge the difference. And you're not going to get any solutions from the Pentagon. You might from some retired generals that really know what war is about. It's about profit. It's about making money. It's about selling killing machines. And they have to be updated every year. So you have a real good business. The war industry is one of the most profitable. And as long as you make money in war, you're not going to be able to eliminate it.
Yes, absolutely.
We were just introduced to a good little book called Addicted to War by Joel Andreas, which is very good.
Okay.
Speaking about that.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I have, to change the pace, I have another question which is kind of interesting. I can see where they're coming from, and I'll let you answer it. Basically, they're concerned about restrictions on certain things in a resource-based economy. Obviously, at the highest echelon of what we describe, laws become obsolete. But they're talking about things like tobacco and alcohol and how they might relate to ages. So obviously the question is a little limited, but I'll give it to you. Are there going to be age restrictions in any way as far as what a child is able to do?
I think it'd be best to allow people to have their beer and wine and drugs if they need them.
Right.
But we feel we can outpace the need for that as time goes on. Right now, people don't have solutions to their inhibitions. When they drink, they feel they can say whatever they want to say to their spouse. In the future, when people learn to be able to level with each other and talk about anything without inhibition, I don't think they will have a need for any sensory dampeners.
I agree. I think it's interesting.
It detracts from your ability to think clearly. So I think that in the near future, with a relevant education, without making laws, whenever you make laws, don't do this, say no to drugs, that has nothing whatsoever to do with controlling your behavior.
Yes.
90% of the laws that man makes are for controlling people or attempting to control people. You don't want to control people. You want to liberate them so they can learn to what you call think for themselves.
Right. That's a great point. There was one question here that I think we've addressed before, but the question is, have you guys had any contact from the established technocracy movement recently? And,
yes, we have.
Oh, you have?
Yes.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
What would you like to know about it?
Well, the question is, basically, the assumption is that why isn't the technocracy movement in line with what we're doing, or should we attempt to align ourselves with them? There's an assumption that there's an equality of ideology between the two organizations, the Venus Project and
I would suggest people that want to know why to write to technocracy and ask them why.
Right.
Don't ask me. But
Sure.
if you want to ask me for my view of technocracy,
right.
They talked about having a blueprint for the future I've been a member. I've never seen a blueprint. I've never seen city designs, transportation. I've heard them talk about, we'll make things more efficient, we'll operate with energy certificates, but I never found any blueprints, any city design, any way of solving hurricane problems, tsunami problems, jealousy problems. You've had that. The organization itself was not comprised of engineers and technicians that worked on blueprints or anything that I've ever seen. The only thing I've seen on the application years ago, of course, I don't know what it's like today. Years ago, there was a thing called race on the application. And they asked Scott, what was that for? He said, well, that's so that not too many of the one kind of race would join the organization. I said, even if a crab liked technocracy, I'd invite him in.
Right.
You see, it doesn't make any difference. So when I asked him about Orientals, I asked Howard Scott, who is the chief engineer of technocracy, I said, how come we don't have Orientals? He said, the Oriental mind cannot grasp technology.
Wow.
Oh, so of course I disagreed with him, and I tried to point it out. He said, look, I'm much older than you. I understand the Oriental mind. And if blacks want to join, let them start their own section. Well, I didn't like that, and I resigned. Maybe today they've outgrown that. I don't know.
Sure.
But when I was a member, that was prevalent.
Right.
I could not support the organization. Is that what you want to know?
Yes. No, I think that clarifies that issue, because it seems to come up.
We may have outgrown that today. I don't know.
Right. Well, there are some people in the movement that claim to be technocrats, and they are members of technocracy. And occasionally I'll get some communication, but for some reason people don't seem to quite understand the difference. But I think you've made the difference very clear.
Well, all you have to do is ask the technocrats, how would you design our cities so to be safe? How would you distribute goods and services? Tell us how. Right. And I've never gotten that from the organization.
Right. And I think your point about human behavior as well, how are they going to deal with things like jealousy? I'm sure that's probably not in their doctrine whatsoever.
No, it is not.
Right. I think that's
although at headquarters, when I was a youngster, they had a big sign, all is conditioning. And apparently they didn't know what that meant.
Right. Interesting. There's one more question here that's kind of an aside. It's someone that wanted to know your opinion on, and this, I apologize if this is an inappropriate question or if it's not a relevant question, but apparently Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison had two different forms of energy that they had discovered. That's the first issue that I'm assuming, and the question is what your opinion is on these two different forms of energy. Are you familiar with what the question is relaying?
No, specifically, what would that be? You mean alternating current or direct current? Well, Edison gave Tesla a difficult time. Tesla was a brilliant person, well-read, well-informed. Edison was a sort of a tinkerer. He really was not a very intelligent person. Okay. He was technically advanced in some aspects of electric current, but Tesla was far more sophisticated. And Edison obviously didn't understand what he was talking about.
He was a bit of a ruthless businessman, too.
Yes, Tesla was more of a businessman. Edison was more of a businessman, and Tesla was more of a scientist, more oriented toward the technology itself.
Right.
Better oriented, by far. I don't think he could even talk to Edison. Edison was a real simple guy.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned to me before you thought Edison was quite establishment.
Yes.
Yes.
He was interested in Edison.
Right, yes. Yeah, that was an issue of this question, too, that there was a profit motive from Edison and Tesla. The Tesla energy generator was different from energy through waves that Edison was putting forward. I'm not quite sure yes. Okay.
There's a movie about that. I think it was produced by Orson Welles, or Orson Welles was in it.
Oh, he was in it.
Yeah, I know he was in it. I don't know if he produced it, but and there was a good movie about Edison and Tesla.
Yes.
That one in particular.
Okay. Very good. There was one more question that was
All right.
About, had to do with this is again a very speculative question, but I think some people still like to hear some form of answer. Children, what age do you feel that in the society that we advocate, children will say, so to speak, become of age in the sense that they will have freedom, and as compared to today? For example, you're legally an adult when you're 18 years old and you can go out on your own. Do you feel that children will advance more quickly in this new society and have freedom thus quickly?
Well, if you read Cinderella, Jack and the Beanstalk, and Little Bo Peep to children, you keep them as cerebral insufficient.
Right.
But children can learn all about continental drift. Children are interested in engineering, bridges, how they're built. You know, if you think that children deserve little stories about the little white bunny, all this nonsense that we pump into kids' heads,
sure,
you do retard them and hurt them. Children are interested in flying machines. They're interested in transportation. They're very interested in buildings. They're interested in everything an adult would be interested in. Only we deform them by giving them misinformation, which was handed down over the centuries, which is irrelevant. I found my own children talking about continental drift when they were 5 years old. They were talking about the effects of the fluid interior of the earth and how the continents float on this magma. And they were really interested, much more interested in that. They're much more interested in insect life, how insects do things, how they migrate across areas, the devastating effects. You know, children can learn anything. It takes just as much effort to learn a little about Little Bo Peep as it does about how mountains are formed.
Right.
So you damage children when you give them those books about On the Way He Met a Pig, Oink Oink Said the Pig, you know, all kinds of crap which we pump into kids' heads. We make them as they are. We don't even know we're doing it because we think that's the way children are. That's the way you make them.
Absolutely. So to answer that question, it really is contingent upon this new approach to see when children, quote, become adults where they can go out on their own.
They're on their own as soon as they're able to.
Right, exactly.
Not at any particular age.
Right, yeah, we don't have those legal distinctions.
The mindset that we're talking about.
Right. Wonderful. So there's only a few minutes left. I really appreciate you guys talking to me again. You know, I'll be visiting you guys in about 2 weeks. I hope you got my email, Roxanne.
Not about that, but that's
okay. Well, yes.
I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I can get some interviews with you guys, and we can talk about the new film. And if you guys, in the final closing, if you have any announcements you want to talk about or anything you want to address, go ahead.
Well, I would only say that if you want to know more about the Venus Project and you want a lot of questions answered, look up at thevenusproject.com.
Absolutely.
We have thousands of answers and questions which may help you. But we don't want to control people or dictate policy or have a bunch of scientists telling people what to do. They are no better adjusted than other people. All we have to do is provide the methodology for attaining a saner culture, and this is all we're attempting to do. There's no such thing as utopia or any final frontiers. Progress is continuous, and civilization is in the process of change always. You cannot be civilized. It's an ongoing process. There's no such thing as intelligent people. An intelligent architect of 200 years ago couldn't get a job today. So what do you mean by intelligent? Intelligent people are the people that use the best bits that we have available today. But there's no limit to what humans can accomplish.
Absolutely. Well stated. Fantastic. Thanks so much, guys. I will talk to you very soon. And,
okay, great. Thanks, Peter.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And I want to thank all of you for listening once again, and I think that was very informative. It's great to hear Jacque talk about the technical aspects. He, of course, won't talk about certain aspects that are very specific because he doesn't want it to lead to someone stealing the information, using it for negative things. There are lots of tremendous ideas he has that he will not release because it will be used in negative ways. And that's, that's unfortunately the reality that we live in, but he's an incredible resource. So in summary, I think the next point of focus is going to be these project teams. I'm going to get the video up of the London event, and we'll just keep bouncing along. I really appreciate everybody's help. And have a great day. Well, have a great life, as they say, and I'll talk to everyone soon.